On January 17, 1842, the Steuben County Sheriff's Office received a petition from 3 neighbors of the Whitlock homestead, a timber house set deep against the ridges east of Bath, New York. The petition, now preserved only in fragments within County Archive Box 12B, reads, "We have seen no smoke, heard no voice, nor sighted any of the Whitlocks for near 2 months. We fear death or disease." That afternoon, 2 deputies forced entry into the farmhouse. What they described was written with a hand both clinical and shaken. Bodies found. 6 in number. Arranged as in sleep. Warm to touch. No decay. Hearts beat once per hour. These words were taken from Coroner William Shull's notes, a document referenced in an 1843 trial docket later sealed by state order. The docket was catalogued but never made public, labeled simply, "The Whitlock Case. Non-disclosure recommended." For the deputies who first entered that room, there was no smell of death. Instead, the air was heavy, stale, carrying the odor of wet wool, sour milk, and something faintly metallic. The furniture was upright. A pot still hung above the hearth, blackened from fire but unlit for weeks. Shoes were neatly lined beneath the bed frames as if placed for morning use. And on each pillow, the heads of Elias, Mary, their children, and one unknown woman rested in silence. Their chests rose only slightly. Their eyes never opened. The physician who examined them, Dr. Ambrose Keller, reported that none were dead, though none could be roused. He wrote, "They lie as if the body obeys some clockwork known only to itself. They breathe but one measure in the span of 10. I attempted rousing with salts, fire, and blade, but no waking could be forced." These notes would echo in medical circles for decades. But the Whitlocks themselves would fade from memory almost overnight. Bath, New York in the 1840s was a fragile town, perched on the Erie Canal trade and battered by winters that starved the poor and silenced the fields. Families held tight to one another, guarding faith and labor as if both were currency. To vanish in such a place was not unusual. But to vanish while still breathing, that was something else. County records tell us Elias Whitlock had been fined twice for disruptive chanting during service, in 1837 and 1838. His wife Mary is listed in the 1820 census, but not the 1830. A daughter, Rebecca, appears on the Bath schoolhouse roster until 1835, then simply disappears, marked with the word, "Gone." By 1842, when deputies found the bodies, no Whitlock appeared on land ownership rolls. Yet tax ledgers show payments continued, signed by hand in a script identical to Elias's, for nearly 10 years after his reported death. The story of the Whitlocks was quietly folded into local rumor. Neighbors claimed the family had joined a sect, practicing sleep fasting as a ritual of purification. A tattered Bible found in the home, now catalogued as Exhibit A in the sealed trial docket, bore annotations in the margins. Beside Psalm 4 verse 8, Elias had written, "In sleep we are clean. In sleep we are his." The practice, it seems, was not unknown. An 1839 sermon delivered by Reverend Charles Morton warned against families who take to the silence, laying down together as beasts of the field, waiting on no bell but their own dark creed. So what happened in that room on January 17th? Coroner Shull declared them alive. Dr. Keller's notes confirm faint pulses. Witnesses swore they saw Elias's lips move hours after discovery, though no sound followed. But no burial records exist. No discharge papers. No transfer to asylum or infirmary. Instead, the Whitlocks vanished completely after that date. Court dockets show a trial was convened in March of 1843 to determine custody of the land. The trial lasted 3 days, then adjourned indefinitely. The file was sealed. In 1852, a courthouse fire consumed a wing of records, including, according to the index, the Whitlock proceedings. Yet curiously, an entry from 1873 in the Field Journal of Dr. Nathaniel Burns, a Cornell researcher studying familial lethargy in upstate New York, mentions, "The Bath family known for their great sleep persists in local telling. Some say they still lie in the house, undisturbed." The case presents a disturbing divide between faith and medicine. Was this a collective delusion, an illness never diagnosed? Or was it something older, a ritual buried beneath the soil of Appalachia and carried north with families who fled the mountains in search of work? Families like the Whitlocks were often erased from census and church records, their names quietly crossed out. And yet the whispers survive. Some speak of a hymn hummed without words that could lull a child for days. Others of punishments that involved enforced silence, enforced sleep. To view the Whitlocks only as a medical anomaly misses the depth of what the archives suggest. They may have been victims of generational conditioning, shaped by belief as much as by blood. To sleep was to cleanse. To sleep was to escape. But escape from what? If you walk the ridges outside Bath today, the land feels unsettled. Survey maps from 1921 still list the Whitlock property as homestead, though no foundation remains. Hunters speak of silence there, no birds, no insects, just the weight of air pressing down. A 1987 report from a group of amateur historians claimed they located fragments of the Whitlock chimney. They described finding a ring of children's shoes, preserved by soil, arranged neatly as though waiting for use. The shoes disintegrated when touched. No official archaeological survey was ever recorded. The story of the Whitlocks lingers because it resists resolution. If they died, where are their graves? If they lived, why no descendants? If they slept, when did they wake? And perhaps the most unsettling question, did they ever wake at all? The record is not complete, but what remains is heavy enough to press through time. Notes written by men who did not believe in folklore, who did not deal in rumor, recorded hearts that beat once an hour. Breaths that stretched across minutes. Families that lay in bed as if the world outside had stopped. Was it illness? Was it ritual? Or was it something far older, stitched into the marrow of a bloodline that would not wake? On maps of the 1840s, Bath sits like a stubborn mark pressed into the paper, a county seat meant to thrive but never quite whole. By then, its streets were lined with shuttered taverns, barns leaning into themselves, and a canal economy already beginning to rot. The Erie Canal promised prosperity but gave the town only transients. Men who passed through, wagons that rattled and never returned, debts written in ledgers that could not be collected. The Whitlock homestead lay east of town, near a bend of cold water where fog collects even in July. Land surveys from 1819 mark it as 62 acres of timber and clay soil, fit for wheat though poorly drained. By 1834 the county clerk lists the property as dormant, a word not used for land but for families. It is the only instance in Steuben County records where that description appears. Those who lived near the Whitlocks claimed the house was visible only when smoke rose from its chimney. A midwife named Eliza Crandall, in an 1866 letter to her niece, wrote, "It was the place you passed twice without seeing once, and when you did see it, the air turned damp." To understand the horror of what deputies found in 1842, one must understand the town that allowed it to happen. Bath was not cruel by design, but silence was its currency. Neighbors heard screams in winter storms and passed them off as owls. Children spoke of hymns without words drifting from the tree line, and their parents hushed them before the pastor could overhear. There was industry, yes, but of a kind that punished the body into obedience. The ironworks shut its doors in 1838, leaving families like the Whitlocks without work, without bread, without standing. Men drank, women buried infants, and the ground itself gave no mercy. Bath's newspaper, the Steuben Courier, carried brief notes of deaths from fever, drownings in the canal, horses stolen by strangers. But the Whitlocks never appeared, not in births, not in deaths, not in marriages. Their absence became part of the geography, as if the land itself refused to print their name. In the winter of 1841, when no smoke rose from their chimney, no one knocked until January. It was not neglect. It was survival. To question what a family did in their home was to invite the same eyes upon your own hearth. Census documents from 1820 and 1830 show neighboring families, the Crandalls, the Ashcrofts, the Reeves, each with notes in the margins. Unfit. Suspect. Gone west. Bath was a town that marked its people not with praise but with erasure. The Whitlocks were not the first to vanish from its pages, and they would not be the last. Walking the town now, it is easy to miss what remains. The courthouse rebuilt after the fire, the canal path swallowed by weeds, the churches split into stone and clapboard. But in 1927, a property ledger still listed Whitlock Farm dormant, as if the land itself could not be reassigned. In 1979, a surveyor noted that compasses spun without steadying within a half-mile of the site. He marked his map with an X and never returned. Bath is not the kind of place that grows. It is the kind of place that waits. Its silence presses into the hills, into the riverbeds, into the gaps between names and census rolls. And somewhere in that silence, a family lay in beds that should have been cold, their hearts ticking like clocks no one could read. The town let it happen. The town buried it without digging. And the town to this day does not speak the name. The Whitlock name drifts through the county records like smoke that refuses to settle. It appears in census tallies, marriage logs, tax ledgers, then disappears without ceremony, as though a hand had turned the page before the ink was dry. What we know of them comes in fragments, scattered across documents too fragile to be touched and letters written in margins no one thought would survive. Their story is not written straight. It is traced in absences, in erasures, in the silence of a town that stopped speaking their name. The first trace appears in the 1810 federal census. Elias Whitlock, male head of household, 1 wife, 2 daughters under the age of 10. They are listed in District 4 of Steuben County, occupying land to the east of Bath. 10 years later, in 1820, their household has grown to include another daughter and a young farmhand listed only as indentured. There is no surname, no origin, just the word bound. In 1830, the Whitlocks are absent. The district tally skips from Reeves to Crandall to Holloway. No Whitlock, no correction. The space where their name should have been lies blank. And yet in the Bath tax ledgers for 1831 and 1832, payments continue. Property at parcel 62 is marked paid in full, signed E. Whitlock. The signature matches the 1810 land grant papers exactly. But no Whitlock appears in marriage announcements of the Courier, no births in the parish rolls, no deaths in the county grave registers. They exist only when the law demands payment and then just as quickly they dissolve. Local school rosters provide another trace. The Bath School Register of 1834 lists Rebecca Whitlock, age 12. Attendance marks appear in neat black ink until November of that year, then stop suddenly. The teacher's notation in the margin reads, "Gone. No notice." In 1835, her name is removed entirely, the line scratched until the paper nearly tears. No further Whitlock child appears on school rolls. It is as if Rebecca's silence swallowed the family whole. A jail ledger from 1837 records fines issued to Elias Whitlock, 2 citations for disturbance of service. The minister at Bath's Presbyterian Church had reported inappropriate chanting and interruptions of sermon. The note in the sheriff's log says, defendant refused to speak but hummed continuously while arraigned. Paid fine promptly. A second entry a year later notes, similar infraction. Defendant stood silent, wife at his side, mouths moving as if reciting something unheard. No trial, no further punishment. Just the fines settled in coin and then nothing more. From that point forward, the Whitlocks are missing from official record. But fragments survive in private hands. In 1906, a local historian named James Caldwell compiled oral accounts for the Steuben Historical Society. In his field notebook, page 47, he transcribed a story told by Mrs. L. Crandall, aged 84. She recalled, "The Whitlocks were good folk until they began their silence. They said the Lord asked them to sleep, to rest long, to keep pure. We would see them walking in daylight, eyes heavy as if they dreamed awake." She described children who never cried, only hummed, and a mother who laid hands upon their heads to quiet them, as though pressing them back into their sleep. Caldwell's note ends abruptly. Crandall would not say more. She grew fearful. Said even speaking their name carried weight. Other accounts surface in letters between neighboring families. A surviving correspondence from 1839 between William Reeves and his brother in Albany mentions, "The Whitlock house grows strange. No light after dark. No voices at table. Some claim they do not wake at all, only stir once a day to take water." These are not official reports. They are whispers on paper, the kind written in haste and folded away, never meant for record. The Whitlocks' Bible, catalogued decades later as Exhibit A in the sealed 1843 trial docket, offers more disturbing evidence. It is a thick volume bound in calfskin, margins filled with Elias's cramped hand. Verses have been crossed out and rewritten. Beside Psalm 127, he scrawled, "In vain you rise early and stay up late, for in sleep he gives his beloved rest." The word rest is underlined 5 times, ink pressed so hard it tore the page. On another page, a crude sketch of a clock with its hands broken away. Beneath it, "Our hours are not theirs." If these notes belong to a man of failing health, they might be dismissed as fevered ramblings. But the consistency of handwriting over years suggests deliberate doctrine, a belief nurtured and repeated. Elias's fines for chanting, the absence of his children from rosters, the neighbors' accounts of silence. It forms a pattern not of madness but of ritual. A ritual built within the family itself. The disappearance from census rolls in 1830 now seems less like oversight, more like erasure. Some historians suggest clerks intentionally removed the name under pressure from local clergy, unwilling to recognize a family whose practices threatened the order of town faith. Others argue the Whitlocks refused to declare themselves, withdrawing from civic life entirely. Either way, their absence speaks louder than their presence. By the time deputies entered the Whitlock house in 1842, the family had already become rumor. Children dared one another to walk past the tree line. Farmers swore the fields near the homestead grew damp even in drought. The Courier never printed their name, though whispers in taverns told of a family who slept for days at a time, as if practicing for the grave. What happened inside their walls was no secret to neighbors, but it was never spoken beyond the valley. Silence kept them hidden, and silence prepared the ground for what the deputies would find. The Whitlocks are absent from the 1850 federal census entirely. By then the land is listed as vacant. No sale, no transfer, no burial plot. The county clerk's notation simply reads, dormant. The same word used in the 1834 ledger. A word meant for soil, not for blood. Even into the 20th century, their name carried unease. In 1932, a genealogical survey of Steuben County noted, no living heirs of Whitlock line identified. Local reluctance to discuss. The surveyor left the space blank, adding only, family erased. In 1973, an anthropologist conducting interviews with elderly residents was told by a woman named Lena Hartsfield, we were warned not to say it after dark. They are still asleep. The Lord kept them. Her interview was recorded on tape, but the reel is damaged, warping the final words into static. The Whitlocks, then, are not a family in the way records preserve families. They are a shadow stitched into the ledgers of Bath, appearing where duty demanded, vanishing where memory chose. Their story is built not on what they did, but on what remains unwritten. A daughter erased from her school register. A father fined for humming in court. A Bible with time torn from its pages. And finally, 6 bodies lying warm in their beds as if waiting for the world to close its eyes. To speak of them is to assemble fragments. A census blank, a margin note, a whispered warning. But to live near them as neighbors once did, was to know the weight of a silence so complete it could press against the walls of a house, seep into the soil and carry a family into a sleep that has no measure. The Whitlocks were not forgotten by accident. They were forgotten on purpose. And yet, the silence they practiced still echoes in the records we were not meant to find. The church in Bath was more than a place of worship. It was the courthouse, the town hall, the measure of morality. Its clapboard walls held not only sermons but confessions, disciplinary hearings, and whispered meetings after dark where elders weighed the sins of their neighbors. In a place like Steuben County, the church was not simply God's house. It was the only roof under which truth and punishment shared the same pew. The Whitlocks were never recorded as members of the Presbyterian congregation. Their names do not appear on rolls, though their land fell within the parish boundaries. And yet fragments of their faith, if faith is the right word, appear in documents kept not in Scripture, but in the disciplinary files of that very church. Buried in a folder labeled Errant Conduct 1833 to 1839, lies a thin packet of paper browned by mold. On the first page, a trembling hand records, the Whitlock man and wife do not partake of communion. They remain seated, heads lowered, as though partaking elsewhere. Another line beneath it, they teach the children to repeat lines not in Scripture. Their voices rise together as one, as if rehearsed. The church elders summoned Elias twice, once in 1835 and again in 1837. No transcript of his words survives, but the elders' notes are telling. The first entry reads, he claims sleep is commanded, that the Lord instructs rest to be the highest obedience, that their flesh shall be kept in silence until the appointed hour. The second entry, written 2 years later, states only, no repentance. Fine collected. Watchfulness advised. From these scraps emerges the outline of a creed. Not Christianity as the town knew it, but a distorted graft of Scripture bent toward ritual slumber. In Elias's Bible, seized after 1842, whole passages of the Old Testament are underlined, circled, rewritten. He giveth his beloved sleep, appears no fewer than a dozen times. Margins bear annotations, sleep is the sacrifice. Do not wake until the trumpet. Beneath the Song of Solomon, he wrote, the bride shall not stir until her beloved come. To Elias this was no metaphor. This was instruction. Witnesses describe gatherings in the Whitlock home. Not church meetings, but hushed assemblies where hymns were sung without words. Neighbors passing the lane at dusk reported a low hum rising from the timber walls, a vibration that carried even through shut windows. A Crandall boy who dared sneak close in 1838 swore he saw shadows moving in unison, hands pressed to foreheads, mouths opening and closing in silence. When questioned, his mother hushed him, forbidding him to speak of it again. But in Caldwell's Field Notes of 1906, her granddaughter recalled, My mother said the Whitlocks prayed without sound, only in breath. That they offered their waking hours to the Lord, and their sleeping hours to the other one. The phrase "the other one" surfaces more than once. In letters exchanged among elders in 1837, concern is raised that the Whitlocks divide their faith between the Lord and another. The other is never named, but an anonymous note tucked between 2 pages reads, "They call him the sleeper, the one who rests until the end. They wish to keep him company." Scholars who examined the file a century later dismissed it as town gossip dressed in theology, but the consistency of references suggests something more structured. The rituals themselves were simple, almost domestic. Beds were arranged not for comfort, but for alignment. County deputies in 1842 described frames pushed to face the same wall, bodies laid in perfect parallel. On a shelf above the headboards rested a single candle stub, melted into a saucer, untouched for years. Bedding was clean, folded neatly at the edges as though prepared for inspection. It was not the chaos of poverty, nor the decay of illness. It was order, deliberate and unwavering. One entry in the church file, dated March 1836, notes, "Children absent from catechism." When pressed, Elias replied, "They are already taught, that their tongues belong not to this world but to the coming." The phrase is chilling in its implication. If their voices were trained for another world, what words did they rehearse in this one? A letter from Reverend Samuel Ashcroft, written to his cousin in Utica in 1839, offers a rare outsider's glimpse. "I visited the Whitlock home at the urging of brethren. The air within was damp, heavy as a cellar. The family greeted me, but without words. They bowed their heads in perfect unison, their lips shaping silent verses. I attempted prayer aloud, but they did not join. Only when I closed the book did their mouths still. Elias then spoke, 'We are not yet called to wake.' His wife nodded, her eyes unblinking. I left at once, my spirit burdened." Ashcroft never mentioned the Whitlocks again. What the town called heresy, Elias framed as obedience. Sleep was not neglect, but devotion. Silence was not madness, but offering. Their ritual was the absence of ritual, no sermon, no communion, no fellowship. Only the retreat into a stillness so complete it threatened to swallow them whole. When the deputies entered in 1842, they found no altar, no relics, no idols. Only beds. Only bodies lying as though awaiting a command. The sheriff's report describes the scene clinically, subjects unresponsive but warm to the touch. No sign of struggle. Beds arranged in order. House clean. Bible marked heavily. The official conclusion was fever or mass delusion. Yet those who stood in that room carried something darker from it. Deputy John Moore, in a private letter written decades later, admitted, "It was not death we saw. It was worship. A worship I could not name." The rituals of the Whitlocks did not require fire or sacrifice. They required only surrender. To close one's eyes. To remain still. To give over the hours until days blurred into years. And in that stillness they believed something watched. Something waited. Today the church basement where those files were once kept is flooded, stone walls dripping with mildew. The folder labeled Errant Conduct survives only because a local historian carried it home in 1921. Its pages, though brittle, whisper the same refrain: sleep as worship, silence as devotion. The Whitlocks' beliefs were not madness, nor were they invention. They were a theology built from Scripture's margins, twisted into a covenant no one else would sign. In their silence they heard a promise. In their sleep they made an offering. And in their house, untouched by time, they waited for a summons that never came. It was the winter of 1842 that forced the Whitlocks back into the town's memory. January had frozen Steuben County to its marrow. Cattle lay stiff in the fields, the canal iced over, and smoke from chimneys rose thin as thread. In such winters, silence was not unusual. But the Whitlock silence had grown louder than most. Neighbors first noticed the absence of tracks. The Whitlock lane, usually marred with wagon ruts and boot prints, lay smooth and unbroken after a week of snow. Chickens that had wandered off roost in the Reeves barn, hungry and wild-eyed. No axe strikes carried from the trees. No smoke trailed above the roof. The alarm was not sounded out of concern for the family but from debt. Elias owed 3 seasons of unpaid tax, and the county clerk dispatched 2 deputies to serve papers on January 17th. Their arrival, forced, unwelcome, was the first intrusion upon the Whitlocks in years. The sheriff's docket, preserved in the Steuben County archives, records it with sterile brevity. Arrived at property. No answer to summons. Forced entry. 6 persons located inside. But the personal letters of those deputies, passed quietly among kin and unearthed only in the 1920s, tell another story. Deputy Silas Warren wrote to his cousin, "The air struck first. It was neither warm nor cold, but thick as though walking into a cellar sealed for generations. No dust stirred. The smell was of wool, of milk turned, of sleep too long indulged. We found them in their beds, each laid as if by some careful hand, blankets smoothed. I thought them corpses until one stirred, barely, a breath, no more. When I placed my ear to the father's chest, I heard a sound like the groan of timber in frost. One heartbeat. Then nothing. Then again after an eternity." According to the coroner's report filed 2 days later, the Whitlocks exhibited what he termed intervallic pulse. Their bodies were warm, pupils reactive, but hearts beat once per hour, sometimes slower. "Unnatural," he scrawled in the margin. "Impossible." Yet he confirmed it in each of the 6. The deputies carried them to the parlor floor, thinking some poison had rendered them senseless. But their eyes never opened and their mouths never formed words. When lifted, their limbs bent slowly, resisting as though accustomed only to the shape of bedding. Warren wrote, "The mother's hand clutched her rosary. I tried to pry it loose, but her grip was iron. When I held it up to the light, the beads were not carved but pressed, as though from clay not yet hardened." News traveled fast in Bath. By dawn the next day, townsfolk crowded the lane, whispering, crossing themselves, peering through frost-etched windows. The Steuben Courier published a brief notice on January 22. A family stricken by unusual fever was discovered on the Whitlock estate. They yet live, though unmoving. Investigation is ongoing. No further articles followed. The paper fell silent as if ordered. But not everyone fell silent. In February of 1842, Reverend Samuel Ashcroft delivered a sermon remembered long after, "Beware the slumber not of God's making. For some rest not in peace but in pride. And the Lord will not stir them come judgment." Parishioners recalled his hands shaking as he spoke, his eyes fixed on the back pews where no one sat. Court records show the county convened a docket in March 1843, a full year after the discovery. The trial was not for murder, nor fraud, nor neglect. It was titled simply, "On the Condition of the Whitlock Family." Witnesses included the deputies, the coroner, and one Crandall girl who had once been inside their house. Her testimony is a fragment, but chilling. "They taught me to close my eyes and count the silence. If I counted long enough, I could hear the sleeper." The docket ends abruptly. Pages are missing. What remains is a single entry from the judge. Matter unresolved. Parties unfit to testify. Files sealed. From that day, the Whitlocks ceased to exist on paper. No burial records. No transfer of land. The county simply erased them. Yet rumors did not erase so easily. Oral histories from Bath carry threads of the Whitlocks into the 20th century. In 1921, historian Edwin Hartsfield interviewed a farmer who claimed his grandfather saw deputies carry the bodies out, load them into wagons, and vanish toward the county poorhouse. Others swore the family never left the house at all, that the windows were bricked, the doors nailed, and the rooms sealed with lime. In both tellings, the truth is suffocated beneath silence. A single document offers a final glimpse. In 1844, 1 year after the trial, the state asylum in Utica logged the admission of M. Whitlock, female, age uncertain, speech absent, eyes closed. The ledger offers no more. Her name vanishes from the rolls after 6 months. Whether she died, escaped, or was released is unrecorded. The Whitlock event, as it came to be whispered, became a fracture in the town's story. It was not a haunting, not a murder, not a plague. It was something quieter, stranger. A family who chose sleep as creed. Who lay in beds while the world marked them dormant. Who were discovered, written down, sealed away, and then erased. But the land did not forget. The 1927 surveyor's compass spun near the old site. Children in 1953 swore they saw candlelight flicker in the ruined windows. And even now, when hunters wander too close to the hollow, they speak of a heaviness in the air, as though the house still holds its breath, waiting for the hour to strike again. Every sealed file leaves behind loose threads. In the case of the Whitlocks, those threads were people. Neighbors, deputies, children who wandered too close, and one woman who swore she carried the sound of that house in her chest until the day she died. Their testimonies, scattered across diaries, asylum ledgers, and oral interviews, survive only in fragments. But fragments are sometimes enough to reconstruct a shadow. The earliest witness was a boy. Jacob Crandall, 12 years old in 1838, claimed he saw the Whitlocks through a window one October evening. His memory was written down much later, in 1889, when Jacob was an old man. In a letter to his daughter he described sneaking through the trees after hearing what he thought was a hymn. What he found, he wrote, was not song but breath, timed together as though 6 chests rose and fell at once. They lay in beds facing the wall, and yet I swear they were awake. I saw the smallest one's eyes glisten, but she did not blink. He told his parents then, but they silenced him. He told his grandchildren 50 years later, and they wrote it down only when he wept. Then came the deputies whose reports stand between fact and nightmare. Silas Warren and John Moore both testified in the 1843 docket, though their words were heavily redacted in the surviving pages. But Moore, before his death in 1874, confided to a cousin who preserved the letter. It was not that they would not wake. It was that they refused. When we shook them, their lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Warren swore he felt a wind rush from the mouths, though the room was shut tight. It smelled of milk gone sour. In 1844, the asylum in Utica recorded M. Whitlock, female, age uncertain. Scholars believe this to be Mary Whitlock, the mother. She was described as mute, eyelids closed, body responsive only to water and bread pressed against her lips. An attending physician noted, subject hums when alone. Frequency indeterminate. Others in ward complain of pressure in ears when near her. After 6 months she vanished from the record. Some claim she died. Others that she was transferred to another ward under a false name. In either case she left behind one chilling phrase scrawled in the physician's notes. She whispered in sleep, "He is not ready to wake." Not all witnesses were official. In 1861, a woman named Eliza Loomis testified to a traveling pastor that she had once been invited into the Whitlock home. This was years before the deputies' discovery. She described Mary serving her bread, the loaf unsalted, dense as clay. They ate in silence, she told the pastor. Elias would touch each child on the forehead before they slept, one by one, saying no words but humming something low. When I asked the children what game they played, the girl nearest me said, "We are keeping him company." The most striking testimony surfaced in 1961, when the McDowell Gazette published a retrospective interview with Lena Hartsfield, then 83. She was the granddaughter of a farmhand who claimed to have entered the house during its sealing in 1843. According to Lena, "My grandfather said the family was not moved. That's what the paper wanted folks to believe. But he saw the boards nailed across the windows. He said he heard them breathing as he left, like a slow bellows. When he asked the sheriff why not bury them, the sheriff said, 'We don't bury what ain't dead.'" Lena's voice, quavering on the old tape, carries a final warning. "Don't say their name in the night. You told me that too. Don't say Whitlock or the house remembers you." Then there is the matter of the missing reporter. In 1892, a man named Charles Benton, working for the Elmira Republican, traveled to Bath to write a piece on the dormant farm. His editor received 3 letters from him describing strange phenomena: a humming in the ground, his compass spinning, an unshakable feeling of being observed. The final letter, dated August 3rd, contains the line, "I hear them at night, breathing under the floorboards. The windows blink." Benton never returned. His belongings were found in his boarding room, but no body, no trail. The Elmira Republican published nothing, and Benton's name faded into rumor. Even into the 20th century, fragments continued. A 1932 psychiatric file from Binghamton State Hospital mentions a patient, Margaret Reeves, who spoke of sleeping cousins in Bath. She claimed her grandmother warned her never to visit the Whitlock Hollow, that they wait for company and once you breathe their air, you will lie down too. Doctors dismissed it as rural delusion, but her words echo the same phrases spoken a century earlier. And then there is the tape. In 1977, folklore researcher Daniel Klein recorded interviews with elderly residents of Steuben County. One reel, mislabeled and buried in university archives until 2004, captures the voice of a woman identified only as Mrs. Callahan. When asked about the Whitlocks, she whispered, "We were told they prayed by sleeping. That they wanted to bring him forth, the sleeper. My uncle went in that house in 1906. He came back thin as a rail, eyes closed. He lived 3 more years without speaking, only lying down at dusk, rising at dawn. When he died, the doctor said his heart was the size of a walnut, worn to leather." Her breathing grows ragged on the tape and the reel cuts with a hiss. Each of these witnesses carried something of the Whitlocks, but none carried it long. Their words were scattered, their lives shortened or obscured. What remains is less a testimony than a contagion. To speak of the family was to inherit their silence. To witness them was to carry a burden that ate at memory, at the body itself. And then they disappeared one by one. Jacob Crandall's descendants swore his children never slept soundly. Deputy Moore's family sold his letters quietly after his death, as though afraid of them. Mary Whitlock's file in Utica simply stopped. Benton the reporter was swallowed whole. Ann Lena's tape from 1961 still skips, as if something pressed on the reel while it turned. The Whitlocks were not simply witnessed. They were contagious. Those who spoke their name left gaps in the record, as though paper itself refused to hold the memory. And those who heard the testimonies, even now, even you, become the next witnesses whether you mean to or not. Every town has its secrets, but Bath's silence around the Whitlocks was not born of superstition alone. It was manufactured, pressed flat by men who wore badges, collars, and printing presses. The story of the family that slept for 20 years did not vanish by neglect. It was cut from the record with precision, file by file, flame by flame. The first act of suppression was immediate. After deputies found the Whitlocks in January 1842, the Steuben Courier printed one notice and then nothing. Scholars who comb the archives will find that entire issue preserved in brittle fragments, but the column about the Whitlocks has been sliced from most surviving copies, the ragged edge of scissors visible along the margin. Only a single intact issue remains, locked in the County Historical Society, its ink faded to gray. The headline reads, "Family in Stupor Baffles Authorities." No follow-up was ever printed. The courthouse itself suffered a fire in 1859, destroying trial dockets, land deeds, and census rolls. The cause of the fire was attributed to a lightning strike, yet the minutes of the county board meeting 2 weeks prior mention sensitive files requiring storage reassignment. Among the lists of destroyed cases is entry 43-17, Whitlock condition pending. No transcripts, no testimonies, no orders survived. At least none were supposed to. A stray page discovered in a private collection in 1911 bears the judge's note, "Matter unresolved. File sealed. Discussion forbidden in open court." The church too played its part. Reverend Ashcroft, who once recorded his visit to the Whitlock home, never again mentioned their name after his trembling sermon of 1842. His later sermons, preserved in pamphlet form, speak vaguely of those who slumber in false obedience, but omit the family entirely. In 1844, church elders passed a resolution forbidding mention of the case east of town during worship or catechism. Minutes of that meeting remain in faded ink. To protect the parish from contagion of mind, we erase them from our tongue. The choice of words, contagion, suggests the town did not merely fear the Whitlocks. They feared the spread of their stillness. Local lawmen enforced the silence. Deputy Warren, who first entered the house, was ordered to surrender his written report. His family preserved a copy anyway, smuggled in the lining of a trunk. Warren died young in 1847, of what the coroner called pulmonary failure. His widow swore he never slept soundly after that night, that he would wake gasping, counting under his breath. John Moore, his partner, lived longer but grew reclusive, burning many of his letters before his death. A single surviving fragment reads, "They told us to forget, to say only that fever had claimed them. But fever does not breathe when you press your ear to its chest." By the Civil War, Bath spoke of the Whitlocks only in hints. School children were taught local history scrubbed of the name. Teachers struck out passages from older textbooks. In 1871, one teacher, Mary Collins, was dismissed for reading aloud from an unpublished manuscript that described the Whitlock event. The school board minutes record the reason tersely, "Indiscretion in content unsuitable for youth." She left town within the month. Even those who attempted to preserve the story found their efforts erased. In 1892, journalist Charles Benton of Elmira pursued the case, sending 3 letters before disappearing. His editor claimed he had run off to Ohio. But letters discovered in the editor's estate in 1954 reveal another truth. County officials visited the newsroom after Benton vanished. They confiscated his notes, instructing the paper to print nothing. The editor obeyed. He had children to feed. The greatest suppression came in the 20th century. When the Works Progress Administration sent surveyors to catalog historic sites in the 1930s, the Whitlock homestead was excluded from maps. One field agent penciled a note, "Coordinates unstable. Local resistance to naming." His supervisor's reply is blunt, "Omit." By the time aerial photography became common in the 1950s, the land had been mislabeled as fallow pasture. No mention of the house appears in government records past 1960, though hunters swore its chimney still jutted from the trees. Then there are the disappearances. Witnesses who spoke too freely tended to fade from the record themselves. Margaret Reeves, the psychiatric patient who spoke of sleeping cousins, died in confinement, her autopsy report missing from the hospital archive. Lena Hartsfield, who recorded her grandfather's memory in 1961, gave the interview but refused follow-ups. When researchers returned to her home 2 years later, her children insisted she had never spoken on tape. Yet the real exists, her voice trembling in the hiss of magnetic wire. The last known attempt to publish the Whitlock story occurred in 1979. Folklore researcher Daniel Klein prepared a paper titled, The Dormant Family of Bath, a Case of Ritual Slumber. Before it could be presented, his manuscript vanished from his office at Cornell. He told colleagues the file had been stolen. Weeks later, Klein himself disappeared while driving through Steuben County. His car was found by the roadside, doors locked, headlights still burning. The trunk held his recorder, reels spooled with static. The manuscript was never recovered. Suppression was not passive forgetting. It was an active campaign to strangle a story deemed too dangerous to tell. Officials burned files. Pastors forbade words. Families destroyed letters out of fear. Even now, the Whitlock's absence from state archives feels deliberate, as if someone, decade after decade, erased them just enough to keep them from surfacing. But erasure leaves marks of its own. The ragged newspaper cuttings. The court docket's missing pages. The surveyor's cryptic note about spinning compasses. The vanished reporter. Each attempt to bury the story left behind scars sharper than memory. What remains today is not a complete record but a palimpsest, faint ink beneath erasures, ghostly outlines where names once stood. To piece it together is to read through burns and tears, to see the shape of what someone did not want seen. The question is not why the Whitlocks were silenced. It is who stood to gain from their silence. Was it the church, protecting its congregation from contamination? The county, shielding itself from scandal? Or something less human, something that demanded the town's obedience just as the Whitlocks once obeyed their sleeper? Whatever the answer, the result was the same. The Whitlocks became a family unspoken, their house a landmark without name, their story a contagion pressed into silence. To mention them was to court reprimand, dismissal, even disappearance. And so the town learned to seal its lips, to let the ground swallow what paper could not. Suppression is not silence. Suppression is pressure, and pressure leaves cracks. Through those cracks, the Whitlocks breathe still. Every story needs a body. For the Whitlocks, that body was not a person but a house, a structure that should have fallen to weather and rot long before the 20th century, and yet, somehow, persisted. The Whitlock home stood 3 miles east of Bath, near a bend where Mossy Glen Creek split the fields. It was a timber-frame farmhouse, built in 1814 with hand-hewn beams and a wide stone hearth. Records of its construction survive in county deed books, naming Elias Whitlock as both owner and builder. But no records exist of its demolition, sale, or transfer. For a house that should have passed through a dozen hands over 2 centuries, the absence is a kind of presence, an erasure that suggests deliberate omission. Neighbors avoided the site, even after the Whitlocks were removed. Tax maps of the late 1800s show the parcel marked as woodland, though surveyors and oral histories recall seeing the roofline through trees. Aerial photographs from the 1950s capture a faint outline, a rectangle of shadow where light should strike. Local hunters described stumbling across it when deer drove them too far east, swearing the chimney stones remained intact, blackened but upright. One hunter, a man named Clyde Parsons, gave his account to the Steuben Gazette in 1967. The article ran only once before being pulled. Parsons described walking into the clearing as dusk fell, hearing no birds, no crickets, only his own boots on the frozen ground. The house, he said, looked abandoned yet wrong. The windows were not shattered but darkly polished, as if they had eyes. When he leaned close, his breath did not fog the glass. Inside he thought he saw furniture arranged, chairs, a cradle, a feather bed. Yet the house had been empty for over a century. He turned to leave and found the trail behind him gone, trees pressed so thick he had to force his way out. He never hunted near Mossy Glen again. The Parsons account was dismissed as local tall talk. But the Gazette editor's log shows a note in the margin: remove. County request. Unfit copy. The clipping is still stored in the newspaper morgue, folded in a manila envelope, its ink faint but legible. What makes the Whitlock house endure is not simply its physical persistence but its refusal to age properly. Structures left to weather in upstate New York collapse within decades. Snow seeps into rafters, moss swells in stone, roots tear foundations apart. Yet each rare photograph, grainy, misfiled, often mislabeled, shows the house stubbornly upright. In a 1932 WPA survey, the corner of a roof appears behind brush, shingles dark but orderly. In a 1949 insurance photo of a nearby farm, the chimney leans in the background, recognizable only to those who know where to look. Local children of the 1970s dared each other to find it, though none admitted stepping across the threshold. In taped interviews now held at the Bath Historical Society, several adults recall those dares. One man, Richard Foley, said the house seemed to move. You'd see it one summer past the creek, then next fall it'd be half a mile deeper in. A woman, Anna Riley, claimed she once touched the siding and found it warm, like bark after lightning. Neither could explain how a house could shift places or pulse with heat. And then there are the sounds. Oral tradition speaks of faint thumps carrying through the woods at night. Not gunfire, not falling trees, but steady, deliberate pulses. Old-timers said it was the Whitlocks' hearts, still beating beneath rafters that refused to collapse. Some swore that if you pressed your ear to the doorframe, you'd hear the house breathe, one inhalation every hour. One surviving police report from 1983 adds to this unease. A pair of deputies were dispatched after teenagers reported lights in the woods east of Mossy Glen. Their written account is brief: area searched. No trespassers located. Structure noted in clearing. Not on official maps. Appeared uninhabited. Left undisturbed. What's strange is not the words but the follow-up. Both deputies resigned within a year. Neither would speak of the night again. Today, the Whitlock property is unmarked on GPS. Attempts to locate it with satellite imagery show only a dense canopy, no clearing, no stonework. Yet hikers still whisper of a wrongness in that stretch of forest. Compasses falter. Phones lose signal. More than one traveler has reported a sudden pressure in the chest, like the pause between heartbeats stretching too long. They step faster without knowing why. Some folklorists suggest the house is not standing at all, but repeating, caught in a loop like the family it once held. Each sighting is not the present house but an echo of its form, replayed through generations, stubborn as a scar in the land. This would explain the shifting location, the warmth of its timbers, the refusal of moss and rot. It is not wood but memory, and memory resists decay when the mind refuses to let go. Others, more superstitious, insist the house remains occupied. They say the Whitlocks were never moved, that the bodies seen in county records were dummies or sacrifices or placeholders. That somewhere within those walls the family lies still, hearts ticking once an hour, waiting for the moment when the world outside slows enough to match their rhythm. When that happens, the theory goes, they will open their eyes. What chills researchers is not simply the persistence of the house but the pattern of suppression that follows it. Every recorded mention, from Clyde Parsons' article to the deputy's report, ends the same way: retracted, misfiled, erased. Photographs vanish. Maps blur. It is as though the house itself insists on secrecy, persuading officials to redact without knowing why. If the Whitlocks were erased, their house remains the single monument to their existence. An unwilling monument, perhaps, but one that stands. And unlike paper, stone does not burn easily. The chimney jets upward still, hunters say, a finger of defiance through centuries of silence. The house is not forgotten. It is simply unspoken. And unspoken things have their own way of surviving. The Whitlocks were not alone. That is the hardest part to admit when sifting through county ledgers and brittle newsprint. The discovery that their story, strange as it seems, does not stand apart. It forms a lattice, a recurrence, a pattern stitched into the hidden history of the Appalachian Northeast. Begin in Steuben County and the Whitlocks are an aberration. A family found asleep, hearts beating once an hour, erased from the census. But travel 20 miles south to Chemung, and you find the Branscombs. The 1855 census lists them, Amos, Sarah, and 3 children, yet the 1860 record is blank. Not crossed out. Not noted as deceased or moved west. Just blank space where their names should be, as if the clerk's hand refused to write them. A letter survives in the Elmira College archives, penned by a traveling pastor in 1861. The Branscombe house is silent. I did not knock. No child's toy left in the yard. The shutters closed against all sun. Move further east to Otsego County. The Ashcrofts. A surname already whispered in local folklore, linked to blighted crops and children who spoke wrong before they could walk. A school register from 1874 notes 3 Ashcroft pupils attending for 2 months before being removed. Removed by whom, for what reason, is never explained. But the teacher's marginalia, written in faded pencil, reads, "They would not wake in class. Sat with eyes closed, lips moving. Could not be roused even with rod." The Reeves of Schuyler County. the Phelps of Allegheny. Each family appearing in ledgers then vanishing. Each leaving behind only the faintest bureaucratic trace, a half-filled form, an abandoned property still listed as active decades after neighbors swore the barns were empty. A deeper pattern reveals itself not just in absence, but in ritual. Oral traditions preserved in WPA field notes from the 1930s carry uncanny echoes of the Whitlock's condition. An informant named Della North, aged 91, told an interviewer, "They went to bed and stayed. Whole houses. Like bees in a hive when winter comes, only winter never left." She spoke of a hymn hummed low in the throat, without words, just breath, that kept families in slumber while neighbors tilled fields and paid debts. The notes list her testimony as folklore, but cross-reference it with coroner reports from Steuben and you see the same phrasing: eyes closed, bodies warm, unresponsive. The rituals were not public, not written into church records or town bylaws. They lived underground, whispered from grandmother to child in kitchens after dark. The preparation was always the same: fasting, reciting from a handwritten verse, and sealing the windows. The chosen family would lie down together, side by side, and drift into something longer than sleep but shorter than death. What purpose did this serve? Theories vary. Some say it was a means of escape, a way to survive famine years by slowing the body until food returned. Others claim it was devotion, a sacrifice to something older than God that demanded stillness as worship. The most disturbing theory is the simplest, that it was inheritance, a learned condition passed through generations, not by blood but by belief. A doctrine of sleeping, practiced as faithfully as communion. One striking thread binds these families: the reluctance of officials to intervene. Newspaper clippings from the period hint at scandal but never print details. A 1902 article in the Herkimer Sentinel refers to a family indisposed in the manner of the Whitlocks, yet the follow-up edition contains a blank space where the story should continue, the typesetting left oddly jagged, as if something had been cut. County commissioners frequently marked such events as out of jurisdiction or resolved privately. What cannot be overlooked is the repeated destruction of records, courthouse fires in Bath, Canajoharie, and Corning, each consuming decades of ledgers, each blamed on faulty chimneys or overheated stoves. Even in living memory, the pattern persists. Interviews from the late 20th century speak of children in rural schools who drew the same sigils, circular marks with radiating lines, like clocks with no hands. A former teacher in Addison recalled one boy in 1978 who would fall asleep mid-lesson and remain unresponsive until the bell rang, only to insist he had been dreaming with his cousins. He had no cousins in the district. His last name, Branscombe. In genealogical societies, surnames appear like threads weaving counties together. Whitlock, Branscombe, Ashcroft, Reeves, Phelps. They never dominate census rolls, never amass wealth or land, never rise to political office. Instead they flicker in and out, a handful of births here, a cluster of absences there. The families are like stones skipped across the surface of history, each touchpoint brief, each disappearance long. The question then becomes, is it coincidence or is it contagion? Did one family's belief infect another? Or is there an older seed buried beneath these counties, sprouting in different bloodlines when conditions allow? Some folklorists argue that the rituals predate the settlers, pointing to Iroquois legends of the long sleepers, people who entered caves in winter and did not emerge until generations passed. Others see it as a European import, tied to sects that fled persecution and carried with them unorthodox scripture. What is certain is that the Whitlocks were only one chapter in a broader text. Their still bodies, their house that refused to fall, their erasure from public record, these were not anomalies but verses in a larger psalm. And like all psalms, it was meant to be repeated. To trace the pattern is to confront a chilling truth. If the Whitlocks lay in bed in 1842, and the Branscombes vanished in 1860, and Ashcroft children were removed in 1874, then the cycle renews roughly every generation. Every 30 years, another family withdraws, another ledger falters, another house stands quiet. If the rhythm holds, the next silence would not be centuries past. It would be now. And the most unsettling fact is this: modern census data still contains blanks. Not marked as errors, not corrected in subsequent surveys. Just blank space where names should be, families listed as present in one decade and absent in the next. You cannot name them. But the pattern does. The Whitlocks were not alone. They never were. History does not end when the page closes. It waits, buried in margins, waiting for the next hand to open the file. For the Whitlocks, the Branscombes, the Ashcrofts, their silences might have been contained to 19th-century ledgers if not for one unsettling truth. The pattern is not finished. It has begun to stir again. The first modern signs emerged quietly, too small to draw notice at the time. In 1994, a substitute teacher at Corning Painted Post High School filed an incident report after a student collapsed at his desk. The boy was unresponsive for several minutes, yet his pulse, when checked by the nurse, beat only once in that span. He awoke confused, claiming he had been with the others in the house. The report was forwarded to the county health department, where it was marked as psychogenic faint. His surname was Phelps. In 2006, a local police blotter in Steuben County listed a disturbance at a mobile home outside Campbell. Neighbors called in after hearing a low humming, like chanting without words. Responding deputies found a woman and her 2 daughters seated at a kitchen table, eyes closed, swaying in rhythm. When shaken they did not rouse. A note scrawled on the fridge read only, "Seal the windows. Fast until the bell." The family was admitted briefly to Arnott Ogden Medical Center before being discharged. Hospital records show their vitals were normal, though the attending physician added in handwriting, "Bodies too cool to touch for living patients. Cannot explain." The file was sealed after 3 months. What unsettles researchers today is not just the recurrence of these events, but their appearance in digital traces. Unlike the Whitlocks, whose erasure relied on burned courthouses and missing ledgers, modern families leave echoes online. A 2011 Reddit thread from a user in Elmira described hearing a thump every hour from the apartment above, though the unit had been vacant for years. The post was deleted within hours, but screenshots remain. In 2019, a Facebook group devoted to local history archived a post from a mother whose child drew a circular sigil in school, a shape almost identical to the Whitlock chimney stone carvings documented in 1843. The caption read, "He says it's the clock that doesn't move." The post vanished within days. The clearest evidence arrived in 2021, when property assessors reviewing tax rolls in rural Schuyler County listed a parcel as dormant. The phrasing is rare, almost extinct in bureaucratic language, yet it mirrors exactly the notation made beside the Whitlock farm in 1834. When questioned, the clerk admitted he did not remember typing the word. He claimed the form printed itself that way. Forensic genealogists now track surnames across counties, following Ashcroft, Whitlock, Phelps, Reeves. In each generation, a cluster disappears from census rolls, listed in one decade, absent the next. It is not migration. It is not war. These families fall away without death certificates, without obituaries, without graves. They leave houses that neighbors say appear and vanish in the trees, windows dark yet polished, doors warm to the touch. Some argue these are mere accidents of record-keeping. Census gaps, medical anomalies, internet hoaxes. But those who have handled the original papers know otherwise. They describe the feel of the ink, raised, almost wet even a century later. They describe margins filled with faint indentations, words erased but still pressing through. Asleep, dormant, still. Archivists whisper of ledgers that change when revisited, lines shifting, names appearing where none had been before. The return is not an isolated incident. It is a rhythm, steady as a slowed heartbeat, reasserting itself with each generation. And what makes the present moment terrifying is how closely our own lives now mirror the old conditions. Economic collapse, shuttered towns, families turning inward, the isolation of entire communities forgotten by highways and policy. It is the same soil, the same hunger, the same silence. The pattern has found fertile ground again. What is happening now is not folklore. It is traceable in ambulance logs, in deleted posts, in the blank spaces of census data that refuse to be corrected. Somewhere in New York, a family has already sealed their windows. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, a child hums the wordless hymn before bed. Somewhere in West Virginia, a house stands where maps say no house should be. And if the Whitlock cycle holds, 30 years between each silence, then what deputies found in 1842 is due again now in our lifetime. The long sleep is not history. It is present tense. The return is not coming. The return is here. Names are supposed to fix people in time. They are anchors on birth certificates, carved in stone over graves, pressed into courthouse ledgers so the living cannot forget. But the Whitlocks and those bound to them do not obey that rule. Their name behaves differently. To speak it, to write it, to even acknowledge it in ink, is to invite alteration. The record does not hold. It changes. The earliest clue comes from the 1843 trial docket that followed the Whitlock discovery. 6 members of the family were removed from their home and placed in county custody, Yet their names on the docket appear blurred, written over, then struck through. In the surviving transcript, preserved in microfilm at Albany, the scribe's handwriting shifts halfway down the page, the W in Whitlock curling into a Bran, before snapping back mid-stroke. A clerk's note in the margin reads, "Inconsistent appellation. Correct to Whitlock. See index." But the index itself lists no Whitlocks at all. This mutability repeats across counties. In an 1861 church ledger from Otsego, a baptism record shows Sarah Ashcroft written neatly, but the same entry viewed under raking light reveals indentations where the hand originally wrote Sarah Whitlock. In a Reeves family Bible, the genealogy page once inked with Phelps has bled into Whitlock. The K transmuted to an H as though the paper itself were unwilling to settle. Archivists who have handled these documents speak of a nausea, a dizziness, as if the act of reading were being resisted. One, a researcher at Cornell in 1974, described her notes shifting overnight. She had copied passages about the Branscombs, yet when she reopened her notebook in the morning, every instance of Branscombe read Whitlock. The letters were her own hand, the ink identical, but the words no longer matched her memory. The phenomenon is not restricted to old ledgers. In 1999, a genealogy website briefly displayed a thread connecting the Ashcroft line to the Reeves family. Within 24 hours, every mention of Ashcroft had been replaced with Whitlock. The change was not a hack or database error, according to administrators. Rather, the word Whitlock had propagated through the code itself, rewriting field names as though the site had been recompiled. One user claimed his own family tree software mirrored the shift. "I typed in Reeves. The next morning it said Whitlock." There is a theory among folklorists that names are living things, not static labels but organisms, capable of consuming others. The Whitlock name, by this reasoning, is predatory. It does not remain fixed, it spreads, overtakes, and rewrites. Families connected to the sleeping ritual, Ashcroft, Branscombe, Reeves, Phelps, may in truth all be Whitlock, absorbed into a single signature that refuses plurality. One disturbing example illustrates this. In 2004, a marriage license was filed in Schuyler County for a couple named Joseph and Marianne Branscombe. The license was reprinted in the Star-Gazette's wedding announcements. Yet when the couple's grandchildren sought the record in 2018, the county clerk's digital archive listed them instead as Joseph and Marianne Whitlock. Photocopies of the original newspaper still show Branscombe, but the official ledger insists otherwise. In legal memory, their name had been consumed. Why does the name behave this way? Some attribute it to clerical superstition, that record keepers, faced with unsettling families, unconsciously substituted a name tied to prior scandal. But this explanation falters when tested against the physical evidence. Ink altered, ledgers rewritten, typeface shifted decades after the fact. Others posit a psychological contagion, a collective compulsion to rename what cannot be explained. Yet this too fails to account for the digital mutations, where software not programmed for correction suddenly outputs Whitlock. The more chilling theory is that the name itself is the ritual. The families do not vanish into absence, they vanish into Whitlock. To utter the name is to extend its dominion, to collapse distinct bloodlines into a single enduring presence. Each time the name is spoken, it rewrites another page, consumes another surname, spreads another root beneath the soil of forgotten towns. Evidence mounts in oral accounts. A 1962 interview with Lena Hartsfield, archived in the McDowell Gazette papers, captures her insistence. "They were Ashcrofts when I was a girl. But you say the word out loud enough, it changes. Try it. Whitlock. 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 Soon enough, you'll find no Ashcrofts left." When pressed by the interviewer, Hartsfield refused to repeat the name a fourth time. She died within the year. By the late 20th century, folklorists began to avoid the name altogether, substituting initials or euphemisms. The W family, the sleepers, the dormant ones. Yet even this caution failed to halt the spread. A 1987 anthology of regional hauntings printed only "the family that slept," omitting the surname. The second printing, however, included the word Whitlock on every page, despite no editorial revisions between editions. The publisher blamed a typesetter's mistake. The typesetter resigned. And so the name persists, as though history itself bends toward it, insisting upon its repetition. To write it is to risk erasing what came before. To deny it is to find it written anyway. This is why the Whitlocks cannot be contained to Steuben County, or to 1842, or to a single farmhouse. The name follows, rewrites, consumes. It is not bound by geography, only by memory. And memory is fragile. A ledger burns. A census misfiles. A hard drive corrupts. But the name remains. The most terrifying implication is not that Whitlock is a family. It is that Whitlock is the family, the singular bloodline stretching across counties and centuries, rewriting every other into itself. Each erasure, each disappearance, each blank census line is not absence but absorption. To search for Ashcrofts, Branscombs, Reeves, Phelps, is to find only Whitlock staring back. And if the name is still rewriting itself today, then somewhere in the sealed corridors of county databases and genealogy sites, a quiet transformation is happening even now. Your family name, your great-grandmother's maiden line, the branch you thought unconnected, it may already have shifted. Check again tomorrow. The ink will not match. There are files you expect to find in county archives, deeds, marriage licenses, obituaries yellowed and folded into themselves. And then there are the files you aren't supposed to find. The Whitlocks belong to the latter. Each attempt to trace them ends in smoke, literally. Courthouse fires, missing reels of microfilm, record rooms gutted by water damage no storm can explain. Yet fragments remain, stubborn as the house that refuses to collapse. And it is those fragments that form the closing lines of this story, though closing may be the wrong word. In 1987, a historian named Carl Duncan was hired to compile a centennial survey of Steuben County. In his personal notes, filed later at SUNY Geneseo, he mentioned stumbling across a locked drawer in the Bath courthouse. Inside were charred papers and one sealed envelope marked 1843 Trial, W. He transcribed what little he could. The text ends abruptly mid-sentence. Should the bodies stir again, they must be returned to the house. To separate them is to lose the rhythm of the whole. Duncan's published survey makes no mention of this file. He suffered a stroke before the project's completion and never spoke of it again. Even more telling are the coordinates scribbled in the margins of Duncan's notebook. They correspond not to Mossy Glen Creek where the Whitlock farm once stood, but to a patch of forest further east, near Savona. When modern GPS users attempt to plug those numbers in, the map does not resolve. Instead it glitches, hovering between parcels, flickering between county lines. Local hikers say the ground there dips into a hollow where compasses fail, where the air tastes metallic and birds do not circle. They claim a chimney stone still juts through the brush, though each who swears to have seen it places it in a different spot. The suppression of these details is almost as consistent as the details themselves. Newspaper morgues carry blank columns where Whitlock's stories should continue. Marriage licenses reprint under other surnames. Property rolls drop into silence after the word dormant. It is as though the hand of the archivist is guided not by duty but by dread, compelled to redact without knowing why. Even now, librarians whisper of boxes that shift on their own shelves, folders mislabeled despite careful cataloging. They know which names not to speak aloud after hours. And yet the story leaks through. You hear it in the quiet testimonies of descendants who confess that their grandparents slept strange. You hear it in the hum of hymnals that never carried words, sung only in throats and walls. You see it in the recurring circle sigil, drawn by children on school desks and tucked into the margins of diaries, its radiating lines repeating across centuries. The Whitlocks are not history. They are recurrence. Each generation they surface, renamed, resettled, reerased. And when you recognize that rhythm, you begin to feel it in your own life. The skipped beat in your chest when you wake at night. The silence that falls too suddenly between crickets. The empty space in a family tree where a name should be but isn't. There is one last fragment worth noting. It comes from a set of field recordings made in 1973 by folklorist James Armitage. While traveling near Cohocton, he interviewed an elderly woman named Martha Blake. In her kitchen with the tape deck humming, she whispered, "They're not gone. They're waiting. Every hour a heart. Every hour a tick. And when enough hours pass they'll wake. Not one by one. All at once." The recording ends with silence. No click, no rewind, just silence as if the tape itself had fallen asleep. What do we do with such stories? We catalog them, yes, but with unease. We admit them into the archive, though knowing full well the archive itself resists them. Perhaps we were never meant to know this. Perhaps the Whitlocks were meant to lie undisturbed, their rhythm unbroken, their house unspeaking. But knowledge has a way of spreading, like their name, like their ritual, rewriting itself into the margins until it cannot be ignored. This is where the story closes, not with resolution but with absence. A burned docket. A vanished family. A farmhouse no map will show. And coordinates that lead only to blankness. Yet blankness is not safety. Blankness is a pause. And a pause is only a heartbeat waiting to resume. If you have come this far, you have read what was not meant to be read. You have carried their name. And that is enough. The Whitlocks are not past. They are present. And they are listening.